Yeah, I think you're muted there. I don't know if you could hear me.
Oh man, I didn't know I was muted. That is unfortunate. Let me start again here. Uh, yeah, they call it peace through strength, right? But let's be honest. What we've been really seeing is peace through empire, right? And empire doesn't bring peace. It just brings pauses in the conflicts that are going on. And so, right now, with this current ceasefire going on in Gaza, the guns might be quiet, but Israel's already promising to go back in after they get all the hostages back. Washington is still signing the checks to Israel. And while Trump's taking a victory lap and all of his supporters are going on about how, Trump is the pro peace president, and well, all of you who were complaining about Israel and what's going on with Gaza, you should be celebrating and be so happy about this. But beyond just basic skepticism about whether this will last, there's also just paying attention to what's going on elsewhere in the world as we continue to saber rattle with all sorts of different nations, whether it's what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, what's going on in Venezuela, even continuing to uh, escalate trade wars and potential conflict with China. So tonight we're going to be, just talking about what's going on in Israel and connecting it to the broader picture of what is the moment we're in right now in the latest saga of the American Empire. And to help us dissect all of these headlines and deeper questions, I am joined by the great Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com, who I'm going to bring up now. Dave, thanks for letting me know I was muted, first of all, and thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate you joining us. I know you do a lot of work and are quite busy, so I always appreciate when you make the time to come in and talk to us here over here at the Libertarian Christian Institute. And of course, everyone, please make sure that you check out all of our shows at LCI, because we have quite a wide selection here, and we focus on talking about current events and philosophy and politics from a libertarian and Christian point of view. But as far as the diversity of shows here, I think, LCI's resident like foreign policy junkie, because I am all the time on antiwar.com and listening to Dave's daily anti-war news updates, which I highly recommend checking that out. Anti-war news with Dave DeCamp. You look it up, you'll find it anywhere. So Dave, how have you been? It's been a little while since you've been on the show, but how have you been hanging in there with the just the daily grind of reporting to us on what's going on around the world?
Yeah, I've been doing well. Thanks for having me back on. But there's been a lot to cover lately. I mean, it's been so crazy foreign policy wise. I mean, there's so much happening kind of domestically that a lot of the news is focused on that. But on our side of things, I mean, there's just been so much going on with obviously Gaza and Israel and this new stuff with Venezuela and everything. And the threat of another war with Iran. There's just a lot of things happening. In Russia and Ukraine, there's been some major escalations there. Yeah, so we've been busy.
Yep. It's, I think one of the biggest challenges to what we do is because it is almost a daily effort and responsibility to sort of keep up with everything that's going on so you can have a formed opinion on it. And I feel like that's when I talk to Christians or just, regular people about this stuff, even if they might seem like they would agree in theory with sort of the, anti-war, non-interventionist position on foreign policy, they just don't feel comfortable weighing in fully on things because they just feel like it's too muddy. I don't know enough of what's going on. I don't have the ability to fact check everything. How much has, just sort of a meta question here before we dive into headlines? Because I've been I recently, I think like a month ago, I did a show with a couple buddies of mine from it was uh, I'm blanking on their names right now because I'm terrible with names. It was Mark from the Knocked Conscious podcast and Jason from the Drop the Mask podcast, and we were talking about how this like new social media, digital media age we live in has like uh, pros and cons to the ability of us as like anti-war and libertarians to kind of like call out propaganda and expose it. Because on one hand, it's easier probably to find information and to connect with people who are reporting on the ground in conflicts like this than it used to be. But then I also feel like the, sort of official state apparatuses and then their sort of like para, um, you know, associations in the media can also use digital media to throw out a lot of false narratives and almost like false flags in terms of like stories and reporting. And so it's like we can we have more access to information now, but then we're also having to debunk more false narratives than maybe we used to have to do. So what's that kind of effort like on your end?
Yeah, I mean, it is the nature of it. Like, there's all this information available, but a lot of times, fake things basically go viral on Twitter. You have a lot of these accounts that basically they just tweet like one line. It's like they're like news accounts, and sometimes they completely misconstrue a story, and then it just goes everywhere. One example I could just think of recently was Yemen announced that the Houthi government in Yemen recently announced that they're putting sanctions on U.S. oil companies, like in response to U.S. sanctions, which doesn't really mean much. But Reuters reported it as them announcing the ceasefire with the U.S. is over, that they're going to start targeting U.S. ships. It was just completely wrong. And then all these accounts on X like tweeted out the headline, and it just went everywhere. So it was like a combination of the old media and the new media just putting this BS out there. And then they kind of Reuters quietly changed the headline. Um, and you see a lot of things like that. So yeah, it has its pros and cons. And again, the nature of social media is like everybody wants to be on top of the breaking news, wants to tweet about the breaking news right away. They want their tweet or post to be the first one that people see, so they share it and it goes viral. So I mean, kind of what we do at antiwar.com, especially me as like the news editor, in the hours that I'm working, I'm not just like putting out a story like immediately when news breaks. Sometimes I do, like if things are clear, but it's always good to kind of sit back and let things develop and figure out what the truth is. And I think that our readers and like people who listen to my show know that, if they see some things on social media, they can always go to us to be like, okay, is this really true? When it comes to foreign policy stuff. And sometimes it can be a little demoralizing because you see these like slop accounts on X just posting just fake news and just getting like millions of impressions and comments, and they're making a ton of money off of it. But that's just what it is. It's something we got to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what you said there. So let's talk about this ceasefire deal that just went into effect. I guess it was what, like the middle of the day on Friday, or at least it was like, I think it was like 12 o'clock their time is when it went into effect. So what are just to break it down for the audience in case they haven't looked into it yet, what are like the most important key details of this ceasefire agreement on both sides in terms of like what Israel's agreeing to, what Hamas is agreeing to, and is there any extent to which America is, making any sort of promises or assurances along with this deal?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the important detail is that they've only agreed so far on this first phase, which is what we're seeing now. The ceasefire started Friday about noon, and then today we saw Hamas released all of the remaining Israeli hostages, the ones who are alive, in exchange for nearly 2,000 Palestinians who are held in Israeli jails, including about 1,700 who were just captured in Gaza and held on no charges. So that swap happened. More aid has been entering Gaza. Um, but kind of the long-term details, the demilitarization, these details aren't worked out yet. They're supposed to be in negotiations. And one big concession that Hamas made was that they agreed to release the remaining hostages without a full Israeli withdrawal. Another part of this deal is that Israeli troops pulled back to a agreed upon line in Gaza. So they pulled back from some areas, but they still control more than 50% of the Gaza Strip. So obviously there's the risk here of Israel restarting things once, they get all the captives out, and then they could restart the bombing. But, the U.S. has told Hamas that they're guaranteeing that this is the end. That this is going to lead to, a lasting ceasefire deal, a long-term deal. And this promise, this pledge has been made in multiple ways. I mean, you had President Trump today. That was his message. He was speaking to the Israeli Knesset. He also chaired a summit in Egypt, and that's what he keeps saying that when he's asked by reporters that it's the end, it's the end, it's the end. And also, we just learned that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. So Witkoff is Trump's Middle East envoy, and Kushner has been very involved in his activities lately. They met directly. I don't know if I'm still on, but they met directly with Hamas last week. And, and in that meeting, they pledged, that this, they gave them their word that this is the end. So they met directly. I mean, I feel like that has to mean something. At the same time, we've seen that Trump's word doesn't mean much, especially when it was related to the negotiations with Iran, because they started a war with Iran during the negotiations. So, and I mean, Hamas has said, Hamas officials have said that, like, we're completely relying on the word of the United States on this, on Trump. And there's also reporting in Israeli media that there's been a secret kind of side agreement between the U.S. and Israel, that the U.S. said it would back Israel in breaking the ceasefire, in taking military action if they determine, the language was like, if they determine that Hamas is violating the deal in a way that threatens Israel's security, which kind of, that can be stretched. And the U.S. gave Israel a similar guarantee for Lebanon, where they violate the ceasefire like every day, basically. And Hezbollah has not fired back. So it's just literally just been Israel. So, these are concerning things about it. And I think it's great to see that the killing has stopped, at least for now. But, it's going to become more clear in the coming weeks if this thing's really going to stick, I think.
Yeah. I know there's always, with any of these things, there's always like there's a little bit of fog as things, whether when conflict is starting, there's like the fog of war. And then there's always like the kind of like murky nature of these ceasefire deals, because there's all these sort of like reports of one side or the other, like they'll say they're already violating it, right? So I saw on one hand people claiming that Israel like had already been violating it, and then people saying like, no, it was just a, I guess like just not understanding the time zones properly. But then there was also something related to like Hamas doing some sort of like they were out there fighting certain like militia groups, or trying to detain, or like saying they're trying to like lower crime on the city level. And I heard you talk a little bit about this on the report this morning, but I was hoping maybe you could provide a little bit of extra clarity on sort of that front, because I mean, as you and I both know, it's like people are going to look at either side of that and then try to, run with it to push a particular narrative, whether they're, pro-Israel or anti-Israel.
Yeah. So what Hamas has basically been doing is kind of reasserting control in the cities where Israel pulled out. And there's been some fighting between them and some militias that have been armed by Israel. As I understand it, some families, some clans that didn't collaborate with Israel that are also there's been some fighting between them and Hamas, and there's been some executions of people accused of collaborating. What's interesting, because so you see kind of a lot of people really pushing this story to say Hamas is violating the deal. Trump was asked about it, and he said that, we gave them permission to do that, to kind of reassert control, to crack down on crime, because there's a lot of crime in the area. So that's interesting. So I think that's important for people to be aware of, that Trump is saying that they actually said, Hamas could do what they're doing on the ground. And then the other side of it. So, it wasn't exactly clear like when the ceasefire was going to go into effect, because it was, I think, early Friday morning in Israel, like right after midnight, that they approved the deal. And Israeli media was reporting that means the ceasefire is in effect. And then there were some Israeli airstrikes, but then it wasn't actually until noon Gaza time that the ceasefire really went into effect. And for the most part, it has held. I mean, the only report I've seen was Sunday night. There was a report of a Palestinian being killed in southern Gaza by Israeli gunfire. And the thing is, it was the same case with the last ceasefire. It was really hard to figure out how many people were being killed because Hamas was kind of, was not drawing attention to these Israeli ceasefire violations because they were trying to get Israel to implement the full deal. But during the last ceasefire that lasted from January to March, the IDF killed over 100 Palestinians in Gaza. And, again, it's tough to know exactly what happened in each incident, but there's no sign that Hamas, tried to launch any attacks. And it was basically, it's usually the claim was, there was Palestinians approaching our positions. They were a security threat, so we fired on them, which, I mean, at this point, nobody can take the IDF's word seriously when they say that, especially when we've seen these killings near the aid sites and everything. So stuff like that is probably going to go on because you have a continued Israeli occupation of Gaza. And we'll probably see a similar thing where we won't see Hamas really draw much attention to it because they want this deal to go through. On the other hand, though, we still don't really know how any of this is going to work. So it's kind of all up in the air.
Yeah, that's with these things, it's always very the James Lindsays and the Babylon Bee people were out there why aren't you guys instantly celebrating this? And it's just when these things happen, I think we're hopeful that the fighting's going to stop and lead to a long-term peace, but it's kind of like you're just holding your breath, are they even going to pull it off and actually, have a ceasefire that lasts for multiple days? And you kind of, I think it's...
Yeah, and I mean, if you've seen the pictures of Gaza, we're supposed to say, people returning to Gaza City, it's just, we're supposed to be cheering. I mean, I was very happy when the Trump announced the deal and said Israel must stop the bombing. I got really excited. Israel didn't stop the bombing until the ceasefire actually went into effect. So yeah, we gotta wait to make sure this thing holds. But again, I'm happy that the people in Gaza are going to be getting at least some relief now. I mean, again, things are going to become clear, I think, in the coming days. If we see them really, if we see Israel allow mobile homes and trailers and to come into Gaza where they could set up some structures for people to live in, that will be a sign that they're actually going to let them stay there, and rebuild. Because during the last ceasefire, I think they might have let some of those types of mobile homes in, but they for the most part blocked them, which was a violation of the first ceasefire deal. So we got to wait to see things like that. And one reason why I'm a bit more optimistic than most people about this, kind of on our side. And one reason is because I didn't see this coming. And for a few months there, I basically wrote off whatever Trump said about Gaza because he would be like, "Oh, there's going to be a deal soon, you'll see." And then Israel launches this huge offensive to destroy Gaza City, and so I was kind of just dismissing it. And then Netanyahu came to town and they released the ceasefire deal, and I was not expecting it to go the way it did. And a lot of people are saying, there's no way he's going to put the pressure on Netanyahu, and I'm very skeptical, but I do think maybe something has changed. Because it is going to take significant pressure from Trump on Israel to make this happen. And it seems like the approach that they're taking is praising Netanyahu. I'm sure he's going to be getting stuff out of this, probably more weapons, maybe another war with Iran, or an escalation in Lebanon or something like that, the West Bank. And that's the thing. It's not like there's justice happening here. This is still the U.S. and Israel deeply, involved together in this, whatever's next.
Right.
So without a change to that relationship with the Israeli occupation, continuing in the West Bank and continuing in Gaza, it's this is not a recipe for peace, really. I mean, it's they're killing less people, and we should be happy about that, obviously, but it's not like we should be so thankful about it. This is
Right.
something that should have happened a long time ago.
You mentioned that hopefully more aid can come in, not just food and water, but medicine, mobile homes, shelter for people. I saw the Free Press, and you talked about this, published a piece semi recently claiming that a lot of stories about the effects of the Israeli blockade creating famine and starvation and the deaths of Palestinian children and civilians were fake, or at least highly exaggerated. So, and I know you reported that there then was some uh, people who recently kind of like looked into the free press's methodology on that, and that they didn't really contact families or the doctors or the hospitals in the region, and made some claims that were just false, like about like certain individual cases where, like, I know there was one where like the kid had cerebral palsy, and they were like, well, they had this condition beforehand. It's like, yeah, but like that doesn't cause you to be withering away
Yeah.
to skin and bone. What causes that is, not having food and water. And yeah, like it's even worse if you have a pre-existing condition to then not be getting enough food or water. How much you've covered this a lot. I know you uh, watch a lot of the reporting that gets done like there, like on the ground. What's your take on not just the free press's claim, but just the claims from skeptics in general that have been saying that I mean, I've seen it range from, well, maybe it's a little bad, but it's not that bad. It's not like all of the food and aid isn't getting there, and they're just trying to stop Hamas from stealing it at certain points, and and then going as far, the other side of that spectrum is people saying that it's not only that it's not so bad, but that like, oh, uh, there's still plenty of these people who are just like, fine. They're living semi normally. They're going and getting their, like, I saw this one video that was so weird because it was uh this uh female Palestinian saying something not in English, and it was like being translated on the screen, and she's like holding her phone, and you see like her hand, and you see like a bunch of rubble around her, and then the social media account influencer like cut away, like, hold on, we're supposed to believe you're in some kind of like war torn region or whatnot, but like you had time to get your nails done. So just I don't know, it's just like weird, like people are trying to like act like on one hand it's either not that bad, or to even go as far as to say that like what you think, like there's not refugee camps, you think like what they're just all like there's a war zone, but people are just like still like going to work and living like business as usual. Like it's just to me it's I'm trying to ask questions like semi objectively, but it kind of just feels like a ridiculous question, because it's just like if you've paid attention just a little bit to what's going on there, and just the footage, like all like the drone footage of just like going over the entire region and looking at the destruction, it's like, come on, like there's no way to I think in good faith act like uh there's not a lot of starvation and suffering going on there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, again, back to that first ceasefire deal. I believe it was March 2nd, early March. Israel blocked everything from entering Gaza. They announced it. They stopped letting all aid in. During the ceasefire before that, aid was kind of surged into Gaza. A lot of trucks were allowed in. It was part of the initial deal. But then they cut it all off for a few months, until basically the end of May, when they let like a trickle in, and then they started this so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. But during that almost 3 months where it was completely shut off, we started to see the bakeries closed, the charity kitchens closed that were run by like the World Food Program and other organizations. And people were running out of ways to get food. And we started seeing, very emaciated children, including one of these kids who was, I believe he was about a year and a half old, who was the focus of the free press thing. And one thing, so it was drop site news that had the response to that report. One thing they showed was the child before March 2nd, before the Israeli blockade, and after. And he was, fat and happy before it. And after, he was, skin and bones. And regardless, and it wasn't clear what his, if I understand it correctly, it wasn't clear what his pre-existing condition was, but he needed like additional nutrients and supplements to be healthy and normal. And that could have been caused by the fact that his mother was malnourished when she was pregnant with him and gave birth under the bombing campaign. So these things are compounded on each other. So like it's just kind of absurd. It's absurd for a few reasons to say, oh, all these kids have pre-existing conditions. That's why they're starving. Well, they're starving because they can't get access to food, to basic food that you and I can get anytime we want. Like cerebral palsy, like you mentioned. Like I know people who have that, and they're not starving. They're not emaciated like that. And the other thing is that when famine sets in, these are always the first people to die. I mean, that's just always what happens. And then you see the people like, oh, look at these adults they look like they're eating fine when they see pictures of these babies and kids, but it's the children, they who have the worst effects from it. And I mean, because of all this kind of denial, I was kind of going back and looking at pictures from Yemen, from the famine there, from Sudan, and like you could see the children are like skin and bones, and the adults don't look like that. So it's like it's just they're trying to pick all these things out, um, and then a famine was officially declared by the IPC, which is a UN-backed food monitor, and also the FuseNet, the Famine Early Warning System Network, which is a U.S. government-funded food monitor. They both concurred that famine was occurring at least in Gaza City, where they got data from, and the way that they determined this, one of the measures was measuring the circumference of children's arms, and also, so one of the things is, famine doesn't, as I understand it, doesn't have like a legal definition, but their definition of famine, they have a pretty high bar to make that declaration, including that 2 out of every 10,000 people are dying per day due to hunger or malnutrition related causes. And the number of deaths reported by the health ministry related to famine were nowhere near that. But their report determined that the death toll of the famine deaths are likely much higher than what the health ministry and what the hospitals are recording. Because for a few reasons, you have people dying outside of the hospitals, and also people dying, and this is something we saw a lot of doctors say who went to Gaza and volunteered, was that people were not recovering. People who were injured would go in for surgery and they wouldn't be able to recover because they were so malnourished and they would die. So there's so many, malnutrition related deaths that haven't been recorded by the health ministry. So yeah, I mean, the situation is just absolutely horrific and caused by the Israeli blockade. And like, there's no denying that reality.
Yeah, I think it's even if they want to say, well, some of it's because it's like, first they say it's not happening, then if they convince them it is happening or was happening at least, that, well, it's because Hamas is taking everything. It's like, well, I have problems with that narrative on multiple fronts. One is just that, like, if you're the Israeli government and you're sending, aid in, like what, like the aid isn't being guarded by like the IDF or some kind of Israeli group or something. Like, so, well, they're just like letting people go without any protect. It's like, even if you're gonna say it's all Hamas's fault, it's like, so you're just like you're the one holding these people here. You know what I mean? Like, and I think it's unjust. But even if you're going to say you're justly holding people there, it's then your responsibility to make sure they get fed. Whether that's you bringing the food or making sure that other food that's being delivered there gets to them. So it's just, I don't know. It feels like, you know, a lot of this stuff, it, the expression I use when you're arguing about this stuff is that people set up these situations in like the debate where it's heads I win, tails you lose. Right? They're just always going to find some kind of deflection to, try to make it so that they don't have to deal with the reality of how bad it's been there. And I have questions. I'd be curious for your opinion just on Hamas broadly speaking, because I feel like this is something that's hard to talk about because on one hand, my general just kind of like blanket opinion about Hamas has been to say I'm not going to provide cover for them. I don't think that what happened on October 7th was justified, even though I think that it was predictable blowback and understandable, like why the Palestinians, you know, enough of them got radicalized to the point where they would execute a violent attack like that. And, you know, yeah. Anyway, I don't want to like I don't want to I don't want to feed into narratives that would sort of say that Hamas and Palestinians, like there's no distinction there. I know there's even Palestinians who have protested Hamas, and it seems to me fairly obvious that Hamas is like, on balance, not a force for good, not a force I want to defend. And yet I feel like people can like miss the nuance maybe that like Hamas isn't a monolith. I know there's like a political um part to it. There's a, militia part to it, and there's different factions based on the different, regions within Gaza and the other places that they're stationed. And so I feel like a lot of people just sort of like have this cartoonish depiction of Hamas in their head. And I think it's worth noting, as you did, that like this same peace deal that Hamas agreed to now was also on the table. Well, I think it was like a year ago. And I guess the Israelis and the US then tried to say that it was Hamas that was being um, resistant to the deal, but I don't think they really offered any real evidence of that. So again, it's one of those things where same thing when you're dealing with like Ukraine Russia conflict, where you're like, I don't want to paint Putin out to be like he's some, you know, uh libertarian non-interventionist angel, right? But it's also true sometimes that these situations are complicated, and even people or political factions or terrorist organizations um might have at times agreed to certain things that that would have ended the conflict sooner, but it was, America or Israel or Ukraine or whatever that was the obstacle to peace then. So I know that was kind of an open-ended question, but it's kind of like an open-ended concern I have as I'm trying to myself wrestle through how I talk about these things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing I covered yesterday was based on what an Israeli, a private individual who was kind of involved in some of the negotiations said. He said that back in September 2024, there was basically the same deal on the table, and that Hamas agreed, and that Netanyahu and Biden wanted nothing to do with it, which was interesting. Um, and essentially, Hamas has agreed for a long time. Their position has been they'll release all the hostages. They'll give up governance in Gaza, but their stipulation on disarming, because that's another Israeli demand, has been that they will disarm when there's a viable, either a Palestinian state, basically, for them to turn their weapons over to, or a viable Palestinian force that could replace them. And so the thing is that this deal, and this is going to be one of the big sticking points, this deal is so vague. Like the bullet points that the White House released, it's like demilitarization, yet there's like some international force, yet there's like they included some language about a potentially reformed Palestinian Authority taking over eventually, even though Netanyahu said that won't happen. And so we just don't know how all these details are going to work out. But it's been no secret in Israel and in Israeli media and that Netanyahu was the impediment to a deal. That he has blocked several. There was a big report in Israeli media that counted 7 times that he blocked a ceasefire deal from happening. And then the nature of a group like Hamas, like whatever you think of them, and Trump even kind of said something. I think this is what he was kind of getting at when he was asked about these reports of Hamas kind of cracking down. He said something like, "Oh, a lot of these Hamas guys, they were young when this all started." It was kind of an offhand comment, but I think what he's kind of saying there is like, the nature of a group at like Hamas at this point, like after 2 years of this slaughter of seeing so many women and children being killed and innocent men, obviously a group like Hamas, that's just a prime recruiting tool. And according to the IDF intelligence estimates that have been published by Israeli media, which I guess you should always be a little skeptical of, because it could be trying to use it to, they could be trying to use this to justify kind of continuing this thing, that they basically recruited, they made up for all the people that Israel has killed, that they've recruited more fighters or as many fighters as Israel has killed. Because, if you're in Gaza, you're a Palestinian, your whole family's been killed, and you want to resist the Israeli occupiers, and, you're going to go to Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, really the only two two games in town when it comes to that. Um,
It's
so
insurgent math.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, that's just the reality of what you're dealing with now. Like, I remember there's a question Piers Morgan, would always ask critics of Israel, be like, "Whatever you think about the history, the, what happened before October 7th, like, Israel was gonna respond to October 7th, so what should they have done?" Like, that's always this kind of big question thing, all that other stuff. The context is irrelevant. What should they have done? Well, it's kind of a similar thing here now, like the context of October 7th, like, this has been 2 years of just the bloodbath in Gaza, that's been so one-sided. Like, what do you expect these
Yeah.
people to do? Like, just lay down and die? I mean, so
But
and they
on
killed all the leadership that orchestrated October 7th. They're all dead. Um, so I think that's kinda something Trump was also, like, hinting at when he made
right,
that
right.
comment.
So it's
Uh
possible that like the people who are in there now are, probably still like not fans of Israel, obviously, but they probably don't have necessarily the same like at least not the like down to the T same uh strategic or ideological or political like uh machinations and beliefs as like those who were in charge 2 years ago. And so uh there's a little bit of and they're probably motivated to I feel like there's like a mixture there, right? Like even you probably could even say there was uh, initially a mixture with the initial Hamas leadership and fighters because like they again I think it's like there's something here that it's tough. I think especially as Christians, like we abhor violence. I'm not um I'm not Muslim, so right, so like it's not that I'm trying to sit here and like defend it, but I can, from a point of just like human psychology, understand how pre October 7th, how they would have thought we're being occupied, we're freedom fighters, and you know they've done this to us, so this is what we're going to do to them. We're going to make it hurt. We have to be we have to go over the top and do these, horrible, evil things because, uh, like, we have to instoke terror, to some degree. And now the people who are, again, like, I think people over the last couple years who are being recruited who are like, yeah, we're actively under attack and, my family, my neighbors are under attack. And so I feel obligated to want to defend, uh, you know, not just roll over and take it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like their uh like their motivation might not necessarily be well like what we want out of this is again the same as what it was uh 2 years ago. I mean they probably want the same big picture thing, right? Like, Gaza to be free and no longer have the occupation, but the exact like intermediary steps in terms of negotiations and hostages and the status quo. I'm sure that's ever evolving. Not just because of the new people, but just because of the, as you said, it's been 2 years.
Yeah, I think survival is a big motive at this point for them. Um, so yeah, and I don't know anything really about the Hamas, the leaders of Hamas now, because you have the ones that are outside of Gaza who are involved in the negotiations. I don't know who's running the show inside Gaza at this point. So yeah, I don't know like really what they're thinking here. Um, but yeah, I mean at this point it's just it's just a survival. And as you said, I mean, if people, you have people joining who literally have their children or brothers and sisters, parents, like blown apart in front of them, buried under rubble, like killed in the most brutal way. I mean, some of these stories you hear about people under the rubble, like trying to like calling people and saying, I'm stuck, and then like starving to dying slowly under the rubble.
Right.
I mean, imagine that. So yeah, you're gonna get people to it's just the reality of the evil and barbarity that you're inflicting on them. You're going to get more people joining Hamas, but and that's the main, at this point I think probably the main motive for anybody who would join. um
Well, and
so yeah, I just
I
think
guess,
that's it's important context when we're talking about things at this point.
yeah. And I think, for sure, I don't know any, so I think like the, the official reports are saying that like 10% of the Gazan population has been uh, killed, but that has to be an underestimate, right? Because like there's still people who haven't been accounted for, who didn't get, they weren't like injured and going to hospitals. They're like, you know, we're gonna we're going to start clearing out all the ruins and rubble of all the destroyed buildings and war zones, and find, well, some dead bodies, and probably find others that, like, like, will there be anything left to count? So I mean, certainly, I mean, I don't know what the estimate is now, but like, I mean, it's
Well,
got to be
it's
north of. I know what the estimates are, but in reality, we're probably talking anywhere from 50 to 100,000 dead now, I would imagine.
yeah, and that 10%, that's killed and wounded, so that's total casualties, which is about 267,000. So that includes people who are killed and people who are wounded. And it's about 67,000 killed, according to the official count. And as you said, this number is going to go up every day. They're digging bodies out of the rubble, recovering bodies. I think there's a good chance that it's nearly 100,000 or 100,000 who have been killed violently, and that doesn't factor in the other deaths, caused by the siege. So yeah, I mean, these are huge numbers. And it's something you've seen the talking point. I forget that guy who Dave Smith recently kind of debated on his show.
Coleman
Coleman
Hughes.
Hughes. Yeah, he said some tweet about like, oh, 97% of the population's still alive. Like, how can you call it a genocide? And it's like the implication is, oh, you only killed 3% of the population of the place. I mean, it's just, and I think, what is it, 67,000? It's about 4%, nearly 4% killed. And that doesn't factor in that, we don't know. I think between about 100 and 200,000 were able to leave during the first months, whether they had families elsewhere or they had got enough money that they were allowed to go into Egypt. That at one point they were just like, people who could cough up enough money could get out. So the population we're talking is probably really lower than the one that the 2.3 million that people are using, which was like the higher end of the estimate. So, but not to get too into the numbers here, but I mean, the fact that when you talk about a war, these numbers are just so like incredibly high. 10% of an entire population killed or wounded. That's like, the estimate for North Korea during the Korean War is like 10 to 20% suffered casualties of the whole country. And that was one of the most brutal bombing campaigns, in history. So yeah, these are very high numbers. And when you look down to the percentages of women and children, based on the official count, it's something like 45 to 50% are women and children. And there's a guy I spoke to, his name's Matthew Cockrell. He's a historian, and kind of gets into the statistics of the death toll. And he's basically says, this is unprecedented, that high of a percentage of women and children killed. To find a war with similar numbers, you have to go back to the Rwandan genocide. Because, for a lot of reasons why civilian men are killed at a much higher rate than civilian women and children, for a few reasons. One is they could be mistaken for combatants, or the other is that they're the ones going out trying to get food and everything. And we actually saw, this is really sick, because we saw that ratio. It was over just 50% women and children killed. And that ratio went down a bit, down to like high 40%, when they opened up the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the aid distribution sites where people were being killed, either on their way or on their way back from getting food. Over 2,500 people have been killed, according to the health ministry. And for those not familiar, I mean, at this point, nobody is seriously challenging the health ministry's numbers. Because, once in a while, I'll have somebody tell me, oh, you can't believe any. That's just Hamas. But all the studies have shown that they're either reliable or likely a significant undercount. And, we've had reporting that the IDF uses them. There's an IDF, or was it the former defense minister, who said that, like, said the number of casualties, and it lined up with the health ministry. But anyway, so you had a lot of men, more men were getting killed at a higher rate since they opened the aid sites, because they would be the ones, for the most part, to go try to get the food. But still, like, these numbers of women and children killed, just unprecedented. And this is something you see these people, so-called urban warfare experts, who claim that this is like the lowest civilian to combatant casualty rate of any modern conflict, which is just completely fake. It's just a completely fake talking point. Um, so yeah, when the dust clears here, I mean, I think we're going to learn things about this that is even going to shock and surprise us, even people who have been very critical of it. Um, some of the practices. I mean, we've had Israeli soldiers admit to Israeli media, shooting and killing people who were just waiting for aid. That they would set basically an arbitrary line that if they crossed, they would kill them, and they killed men, women, and children doing that. I've seen all these accounts from American doctors who went over there that they were treating kids with gunshot wounds to the head on a regular basis and things like that. So yeah,
I remember for over the entire time there's been reports of that, like even when there were evacuation orders, go to this refugee sector, the safe zone and whatnot, and people would get shot at trying to leave their homes. If they even wanted to try to make the voyage, which wasn't always, like you look at I think people who don't look at the footage and the pictures of like, what it looks like, it's like, uh, if everyone's healthy and you can try walking there and you're willing to take the risk, like I guess you can get there, but it's not like they have, working infrastructure with roads and cars to drive on. And if they have elderly or sick people, it just makes it, that much worse. I don't know what the end game is still for this from the American standpoint or Israel's standpoint. It just seems uh, like I know to some extent the countries around Israel have been wanting to, at a more increased rate, try to normalize relations with Israel. But I don't know. Like, what do you think? I have a hard time thinking that if they don't stop soon, right? And even stopping now, I think there's still problems. Like, uh, I don't want to think this, but I can't help but think that like everything they've done is still going to, lead to, I mean, probably at least, still decades of uh, entrenched hatred for Israel, which I don't want. Like, it's not my desire is not I hate Israel and I want them wiped off the face of the map any more than I would say that about my own country. But it's just on both counts. It's like, when your governments are going around, doing crazy, insane, evil things, you're going to get, again, like I make a separation between the people living there and the government, but like certainly the government is not doing, uh, they're obviously not doing the Palestinians any favors, but they're also not really doing the Israeli people any favors. Like I don't think the last 2 years have done anything to make Israeli citizens safer. Not just with what they've done with Gaza, but what they've done with Iran, what they've done with yeah, Jordan and Lebanon, and just it's a mess. I'm not super optimistic about the prospects of peace over the next, uh, 5 to 10 years.
yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine. Like you said, what's the end game here? Where is this going to lead? I mean, I really, I don't see it leading to any sort of solution. This is what the way Trump's actually doing this. So I said, like, if they want this ceasefire to hold, they're going to have to put significant pressure on Netanyahu. But the way he's kind of gotten Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire is kind of by like praising him and publicly, and it seems like it's giving Netanyahu a boost politically, because it was always the idea like, oh, he's continuing the war so he could stay in power. But kind of the way this is happening, it's almost giving him a increased favorability among Israelis. Although you did have them booing Netanyahu when Witkoff and Kushner, they spoke at this rally in Tel Aviv, and every time Netanyahu was mentioned, they booed. But those are the people, the protesters, who are going out to the streets. But yeah, no, I mean, what Netanyahu has done has certainly not made Israel safer, and that's what they're waging all these wars in the name of security. But you mentioned the war with Iran. I mean, Israel's never been hit the way they were by those Israeli missiles. sorry, by those Iranian missiles. And really, the big question with that was who would run out first? Would Iran was starting to get more hits in, and the U.S. and Israel were running out of the interceptors. We don't really know what kind of missile supply Iran has, but if they have, a supply that they could continue strikes like that for weeks or months, I mean, Israel would have been in big trouble. So that was a big part of the reason why they agreed, had the ceasefire happen. But yeah, and you think about the how the world views all this now, the plummeting support for Israel in the U.S., like the polling, I mean, the declining support, in like in a radical way inside the U.S. I mean, that's what happens when you kill so many women and children. People can just see it, on online every single day.
Yeah.
So Israel's in trouble when it comes to all that stuff, and that's been kind of one of Trump's talking points. Is that they're losing. He did an interview with Fox News where he said, "Oh, I told Bibi, you can't go to war against the whole world. You got to end this thing." Everybody's turning on Israel, but now everybody's going to love Israel. That's what Trump's saying, but I don't think so. But yeah, where's this? But so my point about that is that, we kind of thought when maybe this would end, then there would be elections in Israel, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. I think this current Netanyahu coalition is going to stay in power, and they're obviously going to prioritize continuing the settlements and in the West Bank, which is going to lead to more conflict. And we know, because they told us, they say it openly, that this government wants to expel all the Palestinians from Gaza. That's really their ultimate goal. So,
Yeah.
they might try to, but the reality is they can't do that on their own. They would need the U.S. to like fly them, like, the practicality of that just isn't real. So, but they do want to do that. So, there's a chance that they try to restart this thing again. As
Yeah.
as we talked about earlier, I think there's a very high chance of that.
And I have mixed feelings about that because on one hand, I obviously don't think it's just to go and, try to, I mean, it would take a massive show of force to still round up and relocate all the Palestinians and relocate them to where. On the other hand, it's like, as unjust as that would be, maybe that's less bad than letting them stay there to continue to be occupied and killed over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So I don't know. I have real mixed feelings about like what are the least bad options going forward here. Even like, like you said, not all the deals of this process have been worked out yet. We don't know what they're gonna. Israel saying that like as soon as they have all the hostages back, that they need to then proceed with clearing out all the tunnels. And what does that entail in terms of like maintaining a ceasefire and Hamas agreeing to not resist that? I don't know. It just seems like, yeah, I'm not sitting here like hoping for the conflict to start back up, but yeah, I have concerns. Just like I have concerns with like, while all this is going on, I know we don't have too much time left, but it's worth, just at least giving a little bit of, uh, spotlight to some of the other things going on around the world at the same time, because we have, uh, these sort of like semi escalations with what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, where I guess we're trying to give Ukraine like was it with like drone technology to sort of uh, try to weaken Russia a little bit, and then that's on top of the what's been going on in Venezuela the past couple of months. Um, so I wonder how much is like is it, maybe Trump is also trying to like get things tidied up in the Middle East a little bit so he can focus on whatever he's trying to do in these other places. But it does. I can't tell. Like I'm curious what you think. Like I can't tell if um what's going on, around the world. Is there a plan to it, or is it just like because it's Trump and there's all these competing interests going on? Is it like the opposite of a plan? Is this just like he's winging it as he goes, and once in a while he does something that seems to be like, okay, like you brokered a ceasefire deal and that's cool, but then there's a bunch of other times where he's swinging and he's like making things 10 times worse in all these other places. So that's kind of the problem here too, is we don't really know. Trump is almost like it'd be different if we had like a neocon in office and we knew what his motivations are. With Trump, it's like he doesn't really have underlying motivations, ideological ones. So there's no telling what he's really thinking behind a lot of this stuff, other than maybe like trade deals and things like that. So yeah, what do you think about like the broader picture in terms of what's going on with all the other conflicts, and if there's um, is there anything going on with it, or is it just where these things are connected, or is it just uh, the the empire's left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing? No, I think Dave might have frozen up there. I don't know if he can hear me. I hear you. Are you there?
Yeah, I am. I think I lost you for a second.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you caught the end of my question or not.
I think I did. But basically, with Trump, sorry, it looks like my connection's pretty bad. Let me see. All right,
It's a
I
little
should be good
bad, but
now. But
yeah.
I think it's good now. But anyway, so the thing with Trump is that it's like a losing game trying to predict or figure out exactly what he's doing. But it certainly is, I think, within the Pentagon or the War Department, as they call themselves now. There's a lot of elements in there that do want to wind down things in the Middle East because they want to focus on China. And also now, apparently, the new priority is going to be our own hemisphere and the homeland. And so we are seeing this push toward a potential regime change war in Venezuela, bombing these boats in the Caribbean. They want to take more action, start potentially bombing drug shipments in Mexico. But a big part of it is China is preparing for a potential war with China in the future, even though I think they're putting that on ice for now, like the whole defend Taiwan thing, just because of the feasibility of it. They're depleting all these stockpiles by sending weapons to Ukraine, and now also all the stuff that they expended in the Middle East. With they really used a large number of Patriot missiles and other interceptors during that short 12-day war, and other things that they've done to defend Israel, bombing Yemen for a month and a half and achieving nothing except for killing a whole bunch of people. So I think there probably is a big portion of the Pentagon that wants to wind things down and increase the weapons production and get kind of building things back up again. So on the other hand, though, there's other factors, there's other elements within the administration that would want another war with Iran. And I think Marco Rubio is included in that, who is not just the Secretary of State, but also Trump's national security advisor. And I think Trump could probably be convinced to support that again, based on kind of what he's been saying about it. I think he could be convinced again that it would be another short thing. Oh, we'll just, fly a few bombers there and that'll be that. But I think there's a good chance that next time it'll get much, much bloodier. So yeah, it's tough to say what's going to happen next. But I think that's probably part of the thinking, is like they want to focus on other parts of the world. And it's just been too much that they've been expending with Israel lately.
Yeah. I guess this is America first foreign policy.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
mean,
like, and I'm one of those libertarians who, like, based on Trump's first term and who he was running now, like, the some of the people he was running with obviously were bad. And I know he said things about Iran, but I was like, okay, he can't be worse than Biden, right? I was like, clearly with Trump, he's going to at least like be resistant to saber rattling and escalating and things like that. And well, it couldn't be worse. We're sitting now, coming up on a year since the election, and I'm just like, I did not expect it to be this bad on the foreign policy level. Like, I didn't expect it to be good, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. It seems like whatever was decent about Trump the first time around, where he was at least like, nominally anti-intervention and at least like not willing to just like, he seemed to at least kind of like put a little bit of resistance against the you know conspiracy of different interests who are pushing for all these wars. It seems now that he's yeah, it's bad. I don't know. what else to make of it other than that. And um, it's not like, I guess my message to the people who voted for Trump, whether they're libertarian or not, is just that, like, I don't see how, even if you're not a non-interventionist libertarian like me, which I think you should be, I think especially if you're a Christian, you shouldn't be pro-war and pro, wars of choice that are killing all these innocent civilians. But beyond that, I'm just like, how is any of this making us safer or benefiting us economically? Or I don't get it. It's maddening. So I don't know if you have anything you want to close with in terms of just on that front, in terms of just like uh the message about, like, why, like, beyond just the humanitarian side of this, it just, none of this makes a lick of sense.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense at all, especially continuing the war in Ukraine, and talking about giving Ukraine Tomahawk missiles, which is just an insane escalation. And continuing supporting Israel like this. I mean, it doesn't do anything good for Americans. I think that's really clear, and that's kind of the message we've seen from like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others of that. From that side, is just basically this: none of this is helping us or doing anything beneficial to Americans. And I think that's pretty clear, and it's clear to a lot of people.
Yep, absolutely. Dave, I appreciate your time. Everyone, please make sure you check out antiwar.com and anti-war news with Dave DeCamp. It is pretty much, every day. I guess you take a day off here or there, but pretty much every day you release an episode of that where you kind of go over the headlines from antiwar.com and break things down, and it helps keep me informed. And I just highly recommend that everyone at our audience here at LCI checks it out. It's a great place to just be informed about what's going on in the world, and just, yeah, hope we can continue to pray for peace, to use our voices and our platforms to advocate for a foreign policy that isn't just America first, but especially to my Christian audience, like, let's uh, man, I mean, to the leaders like Marco Rubio who claim Christ and that advocate for these policies. I mean, I just think of that. I always go back to the sheep and the goats passage. You know what I mean? Where, like, Jesus says, like, that which you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me. Uh, People like Marco Rubio are going to have a lot of explaining to do on that day of final judgment, I think. So, uh, yeah,
Yeah, I
thanks.
agree with that.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you, Dave, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and watching this. Make sure you give this a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. Check us out at libertarianchristians.com if you want to find out more about us. And as I always conclude by saying, live at peace, live for Christ, take care.